Hi, I'm Julian Villarasa, and this is my introduction to post-colonialism, structuralism, and narratology. So, to begin with, post-colonialism is a critical movement that draws on structuralist thought and emerged in the late 1940s and early 50s. It developed among metropolitan intellectuals concerned with the cultural and political struggles in newly independent nations, such as India. Its focus is in the cultural legacy of colonialism and imperialism, especially as represented through literature and discourse. This theory exposes how Western culture has historically marginalized non-Western voices, often presenting European values and texts as universal. Its core purpose is to challenge Western ethnocentrism and to reveal how colonial ideologies persist through language, knowledge systems, and aesthetics. Some main authors we may talk about are Edward Said, Spivak, and Baba. Edward Said was a Palestinian American scholar who argued in his work Orientalism that the West constructed the East as its cultural other through three main ways: historical interactions, academic study, and ideological stereotypes. Said called this construct imaginative geography, and he emphasized that the Western representations of the East are never neutral and they serve imperial interests. He advocated for a wordly reading of text, meaning that literature must be seen in relation to real historical and political forces, not just in isolation. H.I. Spivak was and is an Indian-born literary theorist who combined deconstruction, Marxism, and feminism to examine the politics of representation. She introduced the concept of the subaltern, meaning those excluded from dominant discourse, such as colonized women or rural poor. Spivak famously asked, can the subaltern speak? Argued that any attempt by the Western intellectuals to represent the subaltern risks repeating the very silencing they oppose. This raises a critical tension: how to give voice without appropriation. Homi K. Baba, another major post-colonial theorist, focused on the instability of colonial identity. He coined the term colonial ambivalence to describe the contradictory relationship between colonizer and colonized, especially through mimicry. The colonized is expected to imitate the colonizer, but this is never fully accepted. His concept of hybridity challenges colonial authority by showing that cultural mixing subverts purity and dominance. Hybridity opens a third space of cultural renegotiation where resistance can emerge. So, overall, while all these three theories interrogate power, they do so by different perspectives. Said focuses on discourse and culture, Spivak on language and marginality, and Bava on identity and representation. Together, they reveal colonialism not just as a political force, but as system integrated in how we think, read, and speak. These affects, for example, the books we read and the stories we hear or read, for example, in its application to literature. So, in order to defy those imperialist tendencies in our book, we shall be critical and apply these post colonial theories. So it's now time for structuralism. Structuralism is an intellectual movement that began in France in the 1950s. It is based on the idea that things can only be understood through the larger structures they belong to. These structures shape how we perceive the world and assign meaning. In literature, structuralism analyzes both individual texts and the underlying system that shape them, such as genres, narrative conventions, and mythic structures. Two main representatives are Ferdinand de Saussure and Claude Lévi-Strauss. Ferdinand de Saussure is considered to be the founder of modern linguistics, and he concentrated his works on the patterns and functions of language use. He argued that the meaning of words are arbitrary, maintained by social conventions. He only argued that words are defined relationally, not in isolation, and that language constructs the world and meaning is assigned by the human mind, not discovered in objects. Claude Lévi-Strauss, on the other hand, applied the structuralist theory to myths, arguing that human thought is structured by binary oppositions such as life and death or light and dark. These opposites shape not only myth but also morality, knowledge, and culture. So, while structuralism offers powerful tools to decode patterns in culture and literature, critics argue that it is often neglected historical and political context, a gap that, for example, postcolonialism aims to fill. So we have three main applications in literature: relating text to general conventions or universal story structures, interpreting literature through the structures of language, and analyzing systematic patterns across cultural artifacts. The last theory, narratology, is a branch of structuralism focused on how stories are structured and how narrative form affects meaning. It distinguishes between the story, the events, and the narration, how these events are told. Some three main theorists are Aristotle, Vladimir Prop, and Gilles Genet. Aristotle, the ancient Greek, in his Poetics identify key narrative elements. The amartya, sin or fault, which often is the product of fatal character defect, the anagnosis, the recognition or realization when the truth is recognized, and the peripeteia, the reversal of fortune. Aristotle sustained that all these elements are centered on the protagonist's journey. Now, Vladimir Prop, a Russian formalist, studied folk tales and identified 31 function or basic story elements and seven character roles, such as hero, villain, etc. And he argued that all tales are constructed from these fixed structures. Lastly, Gilles Genet, one of the most influential narratologists, shifted the focus from what is told to how it is told. He proposed five core categories for narrative analysis: order, duration, frequency, mood, and voice. Order refers to the relation between story time and narrative time. Duration refers to how long events take place to narrate. Frequency refers to how often events are repeated in narration. Mood, which refers to the narrative distance and perspective of the narrator. And lastly, voice, which refers to who speaks and from what narrative position. So, narratology gives reader tools to dissect the mechanics of storytelling, allowing us to understand not just what the stories mean, but how they are told and work. When combined with post-colonial or feminist readings, it reveals how form itself can encode or resist ideology. So, in conclusion, these theories, post-colonialism, structuralism, and narratology, offer complementary approaches to literature, where structuralism seeks hidden patterns, post-colonialism power structures, and narratology may be analyzed from this point of view storytelling technique. A strong literary analysis often blends insight from all three, understanding the form, the structure, and the politics of voice and identity. So, thank you for watching and see you anytime soon.